Between 1816 and 1828, records from St. Augustine's civic archives indicate a notable increase in undocumented internments across private estates bordering the northeastern edge of the city. Among these, the Falconridge family property drew repeated but unpursued complaints. Its central manor, located beyond the municipal boundary, operated under loosely defined legal supervision. Multiple land transfers conducted through ambiguous notarial procedures ensured that jurisdiction remained elusive. Yet a steady stream of arrivals, each disappearing into the estate's extensive acreage, was quietly noted by civil officers. The family's religious functions, described in surviving correspondence, remained unregulated by the diocese. To the public, the Falconridge family maintained the image of a reclusive but devout household, known for their charitable distribution of food and supplies during hurricane seasons. They hosted mass ceremonies in a private chapel annexed to the estate, attracting nearby settlers who lacked access to centralized parish services. The local population considered them eccentric but harmless, particularly due to their perceived generosity and commitment to spiritual observance. City officials made infrequent visits, typically during inheritance filings or minor tax disputes. The estate's self-sufficiency and distance from urban centers discouraged formal oversight. Their surname was associated more with benevolence than scrutiny. The Falconridge estate occupied a wide tract of land northeast of the St. Augustine port. Its boundaries were poorly recorded and largely inherited through internal family transfers. Surveyors who attempted to chart its perimeter in 1817 returned with incomplete measurements, citing terrain instability and unclear legal claims. The property included a large central residence constructed of coquina stone, surrounded by several smaller outbuildings, a cultivated garden, and an attached chapel with a narrow steeple. The entire complex was encircled by dense vegetation, reinforced by natural inlets and shallow ravines, forming an organic barrier against casual entry. The first known Falconridge to appear in regional records was Elias Falconridge, listed in an 1812 acquisition register as purchasing the property from a retiring merchant identified only as S.H. Colden. The documentation contained multiple gaps, including the absence of a closing date. By 1816, however, city correspondence confirmed that the estate was active under the Falconridge name, with periodic supply orders dispatched from St. Key. Augustine merchants. These included preserved goods, construction tools, candles, and imported wine. The volume of orders suggested an occupied household exceeding 10 residents, though the city had no census to verify this. Elias Falconridge appeared at municipal offices only once in March of 1817 to submit a land use declaration. The document was approved without amendment. After that, all estate correspondence was conducted by carriers or through signed notes retrieved at the city gates. A pattern soon developed. One male servant, never identified by name, collected documents on behalf of the family. He did not respond to questions and was known to wait silently at the city courier post for hours if necessary. No clerical complaints were filed, but the lack of direct contact with the estate's primary residence gradually became a point of curiosity among junior recorders. In the surrounding area, the Falconridge estate remained quietly influential. Several farming families within a 2-mile radius reported receiving seasonal supplies from the manor during planting periods. These included basic tools and seed parcels, always left at gateposts without explanation. Recipients noted the distinctive wrapping, thick linen, stitched closed with waxed thread, and labeled with dates rather than names. One recipient, Henry Brough, attempted to return the parcel, fearing a delivery mistake. He later reported that a handwritten reply had been left at his doorstep, affirming the gift's intent and requesting no further correspondence. The estate chapel gained informal recognition beginning in late 1818. It began with the arrival of settlers from the interior, displaced by crop failure and water shortages. Lacking proximity to a formal church, several approached the Falconridge property requesting baptism services and seasonal rites. Although the family had no ordained priest on record, witnesses claimed that the ceremonies were conducted with precision, following recognizable patterns. Residents who attended described a modest chapel interior, with unadorned stone walls, a central altar, and narrow benches arranged in linear formation. No iconography was visible, nor was there any indication of denominational alignment. Despite the absence of formal oversight, the chapel became a recurring gathering site for agricultural workers and labourers without parish affiliation. Its services were scheduled irregularly, but often coincided with equinoxes and known feast days. Participants were instructed to arrive before sunrise and to leave by noon. No written invitations were issued. Notices were conveyed verbally or through simple signs posted along nearby tree lines. A single white ribbon tied to a branch, later removed once the service had passed. By 1820, the city clergy was made aware of the estate's religious activities. 2 reports were filed with the diocesan archive, noting an unauthorized site of worship operating east of the urban district. The first was submitted by a visiting deacon who claimed to have been denied entry. The second originated from a land steward who questioned the volume of foot traffic on Falcon Ridge paths during festival days. Neither report triggered a formal investigation. The diocese marked the case as unresolved but non-urgent, citing the estate's distance and lack of known dissent. The Falcon Ridge surname remained otherwise absent from public discussion. No family member held civic office, appeared in court filings, or registered for trade. All known interactions occurred through indirect communication or third-party contact, yet the estate's presence was reinforced by its constancy. It never declined in size, never posted sale notices, and never requested aid during adverse weather events. During the flood of 1822, when several properties bordering the marshes were evacuated, the Falcon Ridge estate remained untouched. Observers claimed that the property's elevation and internal drainage system diverted rising waters. No residents were seen during this period, but smoke continued to rise from the kitchen flue. Certain city officials began referring to the estate informally during policy meetings. Its name was occasionally cited when discussing land annexation, school outreach, or rural census estimates. One clerk, in a 1823 margin note, referred to the Falcon Ridge household as an adjacent but unmeasured jurisdiction. The phrasing was never formalized, but reflected a growing awareness that the estate operated beyond typical review. A proposal to classify it as a religious retreat was floated during a legislative session, but it was discarded due to lack of supporting documentation. By mid-1824, scattered rumors began to circulate concerning the estate's burial practices. Several nearby farmers noted that small groups entered the estate's side gate, carrying modest wooden boxes. These observations aligned with periods following chapel services. One settler claimed to have heard faint hymns continuing long after visitors had left. Another, passing by at dusk, reported the presence of lanterns moving across the rear acreage in a uniform procession. None of these accounts reached official channels. They were shared informally in markets or during tavern conversation, often with qualifying phrases such as perhaps or it seemed. City archivists did, however, record a change in the estate's delivery habits. Beginning in late 1825, the Falcon Ridge family ceased sending correspondence via city courier. Instead, they began dispatching unnamed riders directly into the urban zone. These individuals, typically dressed in dark linen and carrying sealed packets, were described as quiet but courteous. They delivered signed notes containing requests for goods or affirmations of receipt. The riders spoke infrequently and departed immediately after completing their tasks. Some city merchants found the new method efficient, while others described it as unnecessary given the distance. Despite increased visibility, no further efforts were made to document the estate's internal structure. No census takers were permitted entry, and tax submissions continued to list the property under generalized usage codes. A 1826 assessment described the estate as sufficiently maintained and agriculturally neutral. This phrase was used when no evidence of commercial farming or livestock sale could be verified. The property was thus left undisturbed, classified as privately sustained and non-interfering. The Falcon Ridge family remained undefined in number. Visitors reported seeing between 5 and 7 individuals within the chapel, none of whom were identified by name. Descriptions of age and appearance varied widely, suggesting either a rotating population or inconsistent memory. No records of birth, marriage, or death were filed under the family's name during this period. It was noted by a junior clerk in late 1827 that despite over a decade of residence, the estate had never submitted a notification of passing to city officials. The remark was archived without further inquiry. In early January of 1828, the St. Augustine Survey Office received an unsigned letter regarding the eastern perimeter of the Falconridge estate. The letter, written in deliberate script, requested a reassessment of marshland boundaries due to unspecified erosion. No identifying information was included, but the tone was formal, and the reference points aligned with previous notations from the 1817 survey. The letter was filed without action. At that time, the city had prioritized road restoration along the southern corridor, and non-commercial lands were placed on indefinite hold. Still, the letter prompted internal discussion. One archivist noted that it was the first externally submitted document related to the estate in more than 2 years. The observation sparked a brief attempt to identify the source. 2 junior clerks were sent to local stationers to inquire whether any paper matching the stock used in the letter had been sold recently. No match was found. The trail ended without further effort. Around the same period, a series of parcels began arriving at the port from New Orleans, marked for delivery to E.F. St. Augustine East. The initials matched the known monogram of Elias Falconridge, but no direct retrieval was made by the family. Instead, the parcels remained at the dock for several days before being quietly claimed by riders previously associated with the estate. Their arrival was irregular, with no recorded schedule. The dock supervisor noted that they never spoke unless addressed directly, and presented receipts that were signed but bore no legible name. The contents of the shipments were not itemized publicly, but the weight of the crates and the discretion with which they were handled suggested delicate materials. According to an entry in the merchant ledger, the items were categorized under liturgical goods and private furnishings. This classification allowed for customs clearance without direct inspection. The merchant who processed the delivery later stated that he had been instructed not to open the crates and that the associated fees had been paid well in advance. These shipments coincided with a decline in public visibility of the Falconridge estate. By spring of that year, no further chapel services were observed by local settlers. The customary white ribbons marking planned gatherings were no longer tied along the roadside trees. Those who approached the estate on foot reported no response to knocks or verbal calls. The front gate remained unlocked, but a handwritten sign, partially obscured by weather, was posted nearby. It read, "This season is for quiet." The sign was removed after 2 weeks and not replaced. Despite the pause in public activity, signs of internal maintenance continued. Smoke was occasionally seen rising from the kitchen chimney, and the garden rows appeared tended. An area that had previously held stacked firewood was gradually cleared, replaced by neatly arranged crates bearing printed labels in Latin. Observers from the nearby Ridge Road claimed to see shadowed movement within the upper floors of the manor, but none could identify specific individuals. It was during this lull that a minor legal question emerged concerning the family's tax category. A regional assessor reviewing agricultural allocations noted that the Falconridge estate had not submitted a crop declaration in over 5 years. Given the lack of visible output, the property was flagged for reclassification. However, when the clerk attempted to file a reassessment form, he was informed that the estate was exempt under a special designation granted in 1816. The exemption was listed as charitable non-commercial with seasonal liturgical function. The designation had no modern equivalent, and its original justification was missing from the archive. This anomaly caught the attention of the assessor's supervisor, who ordered a check of surrounding properties for similar exemptions. None were found. The Falconridge estate was the only private residence listed under that category. A recommendation was made to initiate a formal review, but the recommendation was deferred pending verification from the Central Clerical Office. That verification was never requested, and the matter was shelved indefinitely. In mid-1828, the estate resumed a limited form of public interaction. A single notice appeared on the post near the crossroads, leading to the eastern marsh. It announced a gathering for remembrance and communion to be held shortly after the summer solstice. The wording was more formal than previous invitations and bore a seal not previously seen, a concentric ring symbol with a small cross at the center, rendered in blue ink. Several families interpreted the notice as an invitation to return, though no specific individuals were named. Those who attended the solstice service later provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled a modest turnout, fewer than 20 attendees, with the interior of the chapel unchanged. Others described the presence of unfamiliar attendants within the property, assisting with seating and guiding visitors in silence. A few claimed that the service contained extended readings, not drawn from familiar texts, delivered in low tones by a figure standing behind the altar. No name was given. The ceremony ended without formal dismissal, and guests were encouraged to leave without discussion. No further gatherings were recorded after that date. Several months passed with no visible activity from the estate. The usual delivery riders ceased their visits to the city, and no more shipments were logged at the port. Seasonal signs of habitation remained, but no direct communication occurred. The estate appeared occupied but entirely closed to outsiders. In the absence of public presence, speculation grew. Conversations among townspeople began to reference the estate more cautiously. Phrases such as, "they keep to themselves," or "some families prefer solitude" became common. The lack of evidence for any wrongdoing ensured that no official action was taken. Yet the growing sense of detachment between the estate and the city marked a subtle shift in perception. The Falcon Ridge name no longer carried associations of charity or service. It had become, quietly, a placeholder for silence. By the end of 1828, the estate's records remained intact but minimal. No civil disputes, no transfer notices, and no declarations of death or departure had been filed. The land registry listed the property as active and unaltered. A final notation in the year's summary ledger noted, "Property number 612 remains unchanged. Observed activity, minimal. Status, occupied." This line, like those before it, was archived without amendment. Throughout the early months of 1829, clerical records in St. Augustine remained uneventful with regard to the Falcon Ridge estate. Filing activity in the city's eastern sector dropped below seasonal averages, and no new assessments or complaints were received. However, a cartographer contracted to update parish boundaries filed an observational note in April of that year concerning a field discrepancy. Assigned to reconcile property lines between marshland allotments, he reported that the eastern boundary of the Falcon Ridge estate extended roughly 25 meters beyond the last recorded survey. The terrain, marked by low vegetation and minor elevation changes, contained no fencing or visible markers, but bore signs of regular foot passage. The cartographer, whose name was listed as J. Halcombe, appended a sketch to his note showing a narrow footpath bordered by flattened grass and lined stones, extending from the estate's edge into unclaimed state acreage. The path appeared to branch twice, once toward a wooded cluster and again toward a shallow ridge. Halcombe included no speculation and submitted the report with routine documentation. His superiors filed the note under temporary deferment, citing an existing boundary grandfather clause from 1816. No correction was issued, and the field discrepancy was left unresolved. That same spring, a minor issue arose concerning the local grain supplier. One of the riders previously linked to the Falcon Ridge estate appeared at the warehouse with a written request for 30 sacks of flour and a half-cart of preserved lentils. The signature on the slip matched earlier records but included a second line reading, "For the Eastern Table, preparation complete." The phrase had no known accounting relevance and was ignored by staff. However, the total volume requested represented a considerable increase over previous years, and several warehouse workers noted that such quantities typically supported gatherings exceeding 70 individuals. The delivery was completed without objection. The goods were loaded onto a pair of carts brought by the estate's personnel, who departed without further communication. The merchant filed the transaction under private estate order, paid in full. No mention was made of the phrase included on the order slip. The notation was later found in warehouse records during a routine review, at which point the document was transferred to the municipal archive for storage. It remains part of the city's preserved commercial correspondence. As the summer progressed, intermittent visitors to the rural districts began reporting signs of renewed activity near the estate. These included fresh cart tracks along side roads, intermittent lantern light beyond the tree line, and the appearance of what several described as resting benches along the footpath leading eastward. These benches, made from coquina and placed at regular intervals, were unmarked but uniformly constructed. They showed no signs of weathering, suggesting recent placement. One visitor passing through on his way to Fort Mose noted a change in the chapel bell tone. According to his written account, the bell emitted a muted chime at regular intervals near dusk. This schedule did not align with known service hours and was not audible beyond the estate's tree line. Despite these developments, no formal documentation was generated. The estate had not breached any municipal regulation, and no complaints had been filed. Nevertheless, a quiet awareness began to spread among residents closest to the property. In casual conversation, a few began to reference an increase in estate-related movement. A blacksmith living near the old cattle route remarked to a customer that his forge had been asked to produce multiple hinges and latches over the course of several weeks, all with identical specifications. The order was fulfilled, and no questions were asked. In late July of that year, a shipment manifest from the port of Fernandina recorded the delivery of 3 unaccompanied crates marked CFR. The abbreviation had no prior association in shipping logs, but the crates were signed for by one of the estate's known representatives. According to the dock supervisor, the recipient declined to identify the contents and paid in coin without delay. The crates were loaded onto a rented cart and taken inland. Annotations by the shipping clerk noted the unusually heavy weight of the containers compared to their size. No markings indicated fragility or perishability. Once removed from the dock, they were not traced further. Shortly after this delivery, the clerical office in St. Augustine received a single unsigned letter addressed to those who record but do not attend. The letter, brief and without salutation, contained the following text: "Where presence is declined, record shall be preserved. Attendance has shifted to grounds where silence is permitted." The paper was unsigned and bore no date, but the seal matched that of the previous solstice announcement, a concentric ring with a cross at its center. The message was archived as correspondence of unknown origin and received no formal reply. Around this time, a retired notary living near the Northern Ridge submitted an informal memorandum describing repeated observations of processions at dusk. These processions, he claimed, included as many as 15 individuals moving in single file along the tree line, carrying objects wrapped in linen and held at shoulder height. The path they followed paralleled the earlier sketch submitted by Halcombe, but extended farther east. The notary made no accusations and did not request intervention. His report was archived under private statement, and no verification was attempted. At the end of August, a weather shift brought multiple days of heavy rainfall, during which the estate appeared fully closed. No chimney smoke was observed, and all visible windows remained shuttered. A land steward patrolling nearby roads for flood damage noted that the footpath branching east from the estate remained intact despite water accumulation. In his report, he remarked that the stones lining the path appeared recently reinforced. He also documented the presence of a recessed alcove along the path's midpoint, partially obscured by foliage and containing a seated figure. The figure did not move and made no response when the steward called out. Believing it to be a statue or decoy, he recorded its location and moved on. No follow-up inspection was conducted. In early September, the city archive received a small package wrapped in waxed cloth, delivered without signature. The parcel contained a folded map, hand-drawn, showing the estate and surrounding area. Several locations were marked with small blue ink dots, each accompanied by a date ranging from 1820 to 1827. No key or explanation was included. The map was placed in restricted storage due to its unverified origin. A note attached by the archivist stated, "No context provided, awaiting association." Within the same month, the local census team submitted its annual district review. noting the continued lack of data from the Falcon Ridge property. The line item corresponding to the estate was marked exempt religious grounds, static population assumed. A marginal note by the district supervisor read, still unmeasured, no entry since initial filing, observation unchanged. This entry was identical to the previous years and was accepted without revision. As autumn approached, outward signs of activity at the estate diminished once more. The chapel bell was not heard after the equinox, and no additional deliveries were recorded at the port. The path to the eastern ridge remained visible, but unused. Those who passed near the estate described a return to stillness, with the garden beds appearing dormant and the outer buildings closed. One city clerk, visiting family in the area, remarked in a personal letter that the Falcon Ridge land seems paused, not abandoned, but waiting. The letter was not part of any official record, but remains preserved in a private collection. In the final quarter of 1829, administrative attention to the Falcon Ridge estate decreased. The regional assessor's office restructured, and several pending classification reviews were suspended indefinitely. Among the files set aside was a preliminary proposal to revisit the estate's exempt status. The document had no assigned author, and its only notation was a single phrase handwritten in the margin, "No change observed, but silence warrants acknowledgement." The proposal was marked inactive and placed in long-term storage. Outside official channels, however, minor indicators of irregularity continued to accumulate. A leather worker operating from the southern road submitted an invoice for an unusually large order of gloves and protective aprons. The request had come through an intermediary representing unnamed clients, requiring standardized covering for spiritual handling. The wording was unfamiliar in trade terms, but not formally contested. The goods were manufactured and delivered to a specified drop location near the eastern boundary of the Falcon Ridge tract. The recipient left no confirmation of receipt. Concurrently, a series of mild tremors were felt along the coast, registering as minor disturbances in structural reports. Though unrelated to the estate, they brought a temporary increase in clerical inspections. During one such review, a transport officer recorded the presence of newly embedded iron rings in the coquina walls surrounding the outer chapel. The rings, evenly spaced and affixed at shoulder height, had not been included in prior site descriptions. No function was assigned to them in the report. The officer noted their precise installation and lack of visible wear. In November, a routine road maintenance crew discovered a collapsed section of the older ridge trail leading northeast of the estate. While rerouting their passage, they encountered a stone enclosure concealed by brush. The structure was circular, approximately 4 feet high, and contained several flat slabs arranged in a geometric formation. One worker observed that the interior walls bore shallow engravings resembling astronomical markings. The discovery was recorded in the crew's log, but not escalated, as the enclosure stood on land considered outside formal jurisdiction. The entry was filed under non-intrusive structural anomaly. During the same month, a member of the local historical society filed a private inquiry regarding early settler interactions with religious estates. Though phrased broadly, the timing and phrasing suggested a renewed interest in understanding the operational norms of isolated households like the Falcon Ridges. The inquiry included a request to access sealed notarial letters from 1816 through 1820. Permission was granted, and a review period of 2 weeks was approved. The researchers' final report was not submitted. A clerk noted that all borrowed documents were returned without marginalia or bookmarks. As the calendar year approached its end, the eastern path leading from the estate showed signs of partial overgrowth. Grass had begun to reclaim the edges of the stone walkway, and several of the benches placed earlier in the year were covered in moss. Still, no residents from nearby properties reported signs of abandonment. Smoke continued to emerge from the northern chimney of the main house on a near-weekly basis, and the surrounding hedgerows remained trimmed. One settler remarked in a letter to a cousin that the land looks lived in, but no one is seen. The letter did not reach official channels and was discovered later among personal effects. A development of quiet interest occurred on December 18th, when a sealed envelope was delivered to the city archives. It bore the same circular seal previously seen on estate correspondence. Inside was a folded sheet containing a list of names, some marked with a cross beside them. All the names belonged to individuals known to have attended services at the estate chapel between 1818 and 1824. No explanation accompanied the list. The archivist who received it wrote a side note questioning its intent, but did not initiate further inquiry. The envelope was placed in the estate's existing file under the heading Unverified Notation. Around the same time, several observers noted that the estate's chapel windows had been obscured from the inside. Where once pale fabric had served as curtain material, the windows were now blocked entirely by opaque wooden panels fitted flush to the frame. The panels bore no visible markings and allowed no interior light to pass through. This change was observed by passers-by using the East Trail. One claimed to have seen workers installing the panels during twilight hours, their movements precise and synchronized, though no direct interaction occurred. A merchant dealing in specialty metals submitted an end-of-year summary including an entry marked EF as a repeat customer. The merchant noted an uptick in purchases of lead sheets and brass rods, each shaped to specific lengths. While the purpose was not detailed, the volume of orders had increased slightly compared to prior years. The entry was flagged only because it represented one of the few open accounts with no associated address or contact name. Payment continued to arrive via messenger, always in full, and the merchant did not pursue clarification. As December progressed, atmospheric changes were noted by rural residents near the marsh. One described a consistent ambient tone at night, faint but persistent, seemingly originating from the direction of the estate. Another mentioned a low glow near the tree line, which she assumed to be lanterns hung for marking territory during fog. These descriptions were not filed with authorities, but appeared in seasonal letters and anecdotal journals, now held in private archives. None of the writers expressed concern, though their remarks suggested a growing awareness of the estate's quiet divergence from regional norms. By year's end, the estate had submitted no new documents, made no formal declarations, and received no further inspections. Its tax designation remained unchanged, and its presence in regional summaries continued to reflect non-commercial, self-sustained status. An archivist closing out the annual report included a brief notation beside the estate's ledger entry. Status unknown, no objections filed, records consistent with prior cycle. The note carried no recommendation and was accepted without amendment. In the early weeks of 1830, a temporary influx of surveyors arrived in St. Augustine following the passage of a land realignment directive issued by the territorial legislature. The policy aimed to reassess properties with unclear boundaries, particularly those bordering coastal inlets or marshlands. The Falcon Ridge estate, last formally measured over a decade prior, was among the sites listed for potential review. However, when the survey team examined existing records, they found incomplete references and a lack of current access permissions. The property's exempt classification under religious designation remained active, and no residents had submitted revisions or addenda. The estate was marked as non-compliant but deferred. Despite the delay, one surveyor initiated an independent review of the surrounding terrain. This surveyor, identified in the registry as M. Alder, requested a provisional pass to examine only the bordering footpaths and adjacent waterlines. His stated objective was to update topographic markers for the state's coastal resilience maps. Permission was granted on the basis that he would not enter the estate's interior grounds. Alder conducted 3 site visits during the month of February, each lasting under 4 hours, and logged minimal field notes. However, his final submission included a supplemental sheet containing a geometric analysis of the eastern path's alignment. According to Alder's assessment, the trail running from the estate's chapel to the ridge followed a near-perfect arc consistent with a known astronomical curve, the solar transit path recorded. During equinox, the trail's curvature, when plotted, intersected with specific terrain markers corresponding to past solstice gatherings noted in personal journals of local settlers. Alder included a notation: intentional positioning probable, functional use unknown, survey inconclusive. The supplemental sheet was archived under geospatial anomalies and was not flagged for investigation. Shortly thereafter, a clerk in the Civil Correspondence Division noticed an irregularity in the delivery log. A parcel addressed to the Falconridge Table East Service had been entered into the registry with no corresponding dispatch record. The parcel bore no return address and included an inscription printed in ink on the outer wrapping. To commemorate the circle, use only with silence. Inside were several coils of colored fabric, evenly dyed in alternating bands of blue and ivory. The fabric was of unusually fine weave, not typical of local manufacture. The parcel was held for 1 week in the storage annex before being collected by a courier wearing an unmarked grey sash. The collection was documented but not contested. In early March, a land steward performing his routine water level checks encountered an alteration near the ridge path. A series of flat stones, previously embedded at intervals along the trail, had been lifted and repositioned. The stones were now aligned in rows along the side of the trail, forming narrow channels approximately 12 inches wide. Within each channel sat shallow ceramic basins, unglazed and filled with sand. The steward described their arrangement as deliberate, but did not speculate on their function. He filed a simple field note reading, "Constructed placement observed. No obstruction posed, no signage present." The entry was archived with the other site logs. These observations began to attract quiet notice among mid-level administrative staff. Several clerks noted a pattern of coordinated activity around the estate, marked not by expansion, but by precision. The lack of personnel identification, paired with recurring symbols and standardized messages, suggested an internal structure that remained undocumented, yet operative. A memo was circulated within the municipal office, advising staff to defer questions regarding the Falconridge estate, unless inquiries were accompanied by formal authorization. The memo was unsigned and had no distribution stamp, but remained tacked to the correspondence board through the spring. It was during this period that a ledger discrepancy from 1821 was rediscovered. While updating tax exemption rosters, a clerk reviewing decade-old entries found that the estate's original classification had been processed twice within the same week, each time under a different office code. One entry listed the estate as religious, charitable, seasonal, while the other classified it under non-residential spiritual observance. Both designations had been signed with the same initials, but by different hands. The duplication had not affected tax status, but created ambiguity in oversight jurisdiction. A request for clarification was drafted, but never sent. The estate's file was updated to reflect legacy classification unresolved. Later that spring, a secondary report emerged from a visiting botanical surveyor who had ventured along the perimeter marsh. While cataloguing local flora, he observed that a portion of the eastern path was now bordered by planted shrubs, not native to the area. The shrubs, identified as a species of slow-growing boxwood typically found in cooler climates, had been arranged in a line leading toward the recessed stone alcove previously noted by land stewards. The surveyor included a pressed sample in his field kit, along with a brief annotation, "Unlisted cultivation. Unknown origin. Growth pattern suggests intentional use as boundary." In April, the archive received a new piece of correspondence, this time written on coquina pulp paper, a rarity in city documents. The message read, "Attendance is now recorded through presence alone. All signs are internal. No names will follow." It was signed with the same concentric seal used in previous letters, but included a secondary mark beneath it, 3 small dots arranged vertically. The meaning of this symbol was unknown, and the letter was placed in the miscellaneous holdings under unidentified religious documents. Meanwhile, a settler living 3 miles northwest of the estate submitted a private letter to the Land Use Office stating that he had observed figures gathering at the ridge during early dawn hours on multiple occasions. These figures, described only as draped, moved in pairs and did not respond when acknowledged. They carried flat objects the size of ledgers and appeared to stand in fixed positions for extended periods. The settler's letter requested no action and offered no accusations. It ended with the sentence, "If they mean harm, they do not show it. If they mean faith, it is not ours." The letter was preserved in the general file. Throughout May, No further activity was officially logged. The estate remained closed to visitors, and its routine submissions, if any were made, occurred through undocumented means. City merchants reported no new orders, and the chapel remained silent. However, a junior archive assistant noted that the estate's file, typically undisturbed, had been re-indexed. Several documents had been moved to a new section labeled Unclassified Spiritual Designations, a category created earlier that year to handle unsorted entries involving unconventional religious terminology. The re-indexing was not authorized by any senior archivist, and no one could confirm who had reassigned the materials. A notation was added indicating that no further relocations should be performed without written directive. By June, only one additional anomaly was recorded. A groundskeeper responsible for maintaining a public well near the southern road observed that the usually stagnant water level had changed by 6 inches overnight. While investigating the cause, he discovered a coiled ribbon floating near the surface. The ribbon matched those seen during early falconridge ceremonies, dyed in alternating ivory and blue. The groundskeeper submitted the object to the nearest municipal outpost with no comment. It was dried, labeled, and stored in the evidence annex as an item of unclaimed ritual material. No further context emerged. The estate offered no clarification, nor was any sought. On the first day of July 1830, a stevedore employed at the coastal port submitted an informal note to his supervisor regarding an early morning encounter. According to the note, a cart had arrived just before dawn carrying 3 large sealed containers. The driver, described only as tall and wearing a linen veil across his face, requested storage of the containers until retrieval at midday. The containers bore no markings except a thin stripe of wax running across the seam of each lid. The request was unusual given the hour, but payment was offered in advance and accepted. By the time the containers were retrieved, the dock supervisor had arrived. He asked for a manifest, but the driver presented only a folded slip reading, "Chapel intake prepared." No formal records were created. The items were removed and carted inland. When the supervisor later reviewed the port's ledger, he found no entry corresponding to the delivery or retrieval. The payment had been made in coin, untraceable, and no objections were raised by the workers who assisted with loading. The incident was entered into a personal log and did not reach the city archive. Shortly after, a correspondence clerk from the Inland Post Office observed that several outbound letters from the Eastern District had been stamped with a seal unfamiliar to the office. The seal resembled a ring of 12 small arcs forming a complete circle, each arc composed of linked lines. The letters were addressed to recipients in territories as far as Savannah and Pensacola. Each bore only the initials of the sender and included no return instructions. Their contents were not disclosed, but their consistent shape and folding patterns suggested shared origin. The postmaster, upon inspection, allowed them through and added a brief annotation to the delivery record. Non-standard mark, passage permitted. Throughout that summer, sporadic visitors continued to report visual irregularities near the Falconridge property. A member of a traveling legal commission assigned to visit holdings with unresolved claims noted from a distance that the chapel's structure now extended by several feet on its eastern side. The new section appeared seamless in construction, matching the original stonework. No scaffolding had been visible during earlier months, and the addition bore no external identification. The commissioner, unable to confirm land use for the expanded portion, filed no complaint. His log recorded, "Unfiled expansion observed, external continuity precise. No sound heard." By late July, a minor shift occurred within the city's civil registry. An assistant archivist attempting to reconcile property overlays with updated territorial charts discovered that the Falconridge estate no longer appeared in its original format. The parcel, previously rendered as a continuous rectangle with boundaries marked in feet, now displayed as a multi-pointed figure with indentations reflecting terrain features. The change had not been authorized, and the updated rendering included no note of revision. The assistant reported the issue to a supervisor, who reviewed the matter and concluded that the alteration had likely resulted from cartographic updates. No correction was issued. Meanwhile, a small congregation operating south of the city filed a request to access defunct estate properties for seasonal worship. Among the parcels listed in their inquiry was a section referred to as the communal grounds behind the chapel near the old border. The designation did not match any known parcel on public record. The only documentation available described a tract east of the Falcon Ridge estate once used for low-yield farming, now listed as inactive spiritual field. The clerk responding to the inquiry denied access, citing lack of ownership clarity. The congregation did not refile. In August, a boundary agent conducting a water level assessment on behalf of the Coastal Flood Office encountered an object lodged in the sediment near the estate's eastern edge. The object, described as a rectangular tablet of hardened chalkstone, bore engraved text in formal script. The wording read, "For each offering returned, the record is held. The name is not spoken, the pattern remains." The agent, uncertain of its relevance, noted the find and submitted a sketch to the district office. The tablet itself was left in place. No retrieval was requested, and no follow-up inspection occurred. As the season advanced, the eastern path leading from the estate showed signs of renewed clearing. Grass and moss had been stripped from the center of the trail, and new gravel appeared at key turning points. The benches lining the walkway were cleaned, and the ceramic basins beside them were now filled with smooth stones, each stone marked with a single painted line. These markings formed no discernible language, but displayed uniform length and spacing. A passing traveler unfamiliar with the property noted the stones in a personal letter as objects of precision, arranged without disorder, strange only in their stillness. That same month, a merchant operating along the southern corridor received a request for 8 large canvas rolls and several tins of powdered lime. The request came through a courier bearing a seal with 3 concentric lines and no wording. The merchant, who had filled previous orders for the same client, provided the materials without delay. Payment was made in advance, as usual, and no signature was given. The merchant later recalled the order's phrasing, particularly the line, "For use only between dusk and first bell." This phrase was included on the invoice and preserved in the store's ledger. In September, a second map was delivered anonymously to the city archive. Like the first, it was hand-drawn and showed the estate with precise notations. However, this version included markings in red ink along the eastern ridge and near the marsh. The map's title, written in small script, read, "Observed alignment of those in formation." The meaning of the phrase was unclear. Each red mark was accompanied by a date, none extending past the previous solstice. The archivist receiving the map placed it in restricted holdings and filed a note reading, "Refer to prior submission, pattern continuity evident, awaiting instruction." By mid-autumn, inquiries into the estate declined. The chapel remained unopened, and no further public notices were posted. However, the pattern of silent deliveries and sealed letters persisted. Observers who passed the property noted that the house and outbuildings remained in impeccable condition, with fresh lime on the outer walls and maintained shutters. A schoolteacher traveling to visit a relative wrote in her diary that the grounds had the look of occupancy, but no faces, no sound, only the sense that each hour passed as it should, and nothing late. The final entry related to the estate in 1830 came from a postmaster's assistant who logged the return of an undeliverable letter addressed simply to those continuing. The letter had been routed through 2 cities before arriving in St. Augustine. Its envelope was unsealed upon arrival, and the contents were blank. The postmaster, uncertain of protocol, placed the envelope in a drawer labeled "Correspondence with incomplete designation." No further mail bearing that phrasing was received. In the first quarter of 1831, the Office of Inland Property Records initiated a clerical audit of tax-exempt parcels following the appointment of a new registrar. The audit, designed to verify accuracy and long-standing exemptions, included both religious and agricultural holdings within a 20-mile radius of St. Augustine. The Falcon Ridge estate was assigned to the 3rd rotation, scheduled for review in early spring. A junior registrar tasked with preliminary cross-checks noted that the estate had not submitted any updated documents in more than 12 years. Despite this, its exemption remained uninterrupted, supported by the original filings from 1816. The registrar submitted a request for access to verify the estate's function and structural condition. The request was signed and passed to the central clerk, who forwarded it to the postal carrier known to handle correspondence for that district. No reply was received from the estate. After a 2-week waiting period, the registrar amended the request to include an observation visit, with the note, "Entry not required, perimeter survey only, confirmation of presence." This revised filing was approved, and the registrar was granted provisional authorization to walk the estate's border paths. The perimeter visit occurred on the 2nd week of March. The registrar's notes described the grounds as clean and orderly, with all structures intact and no signs of neglect. The eastern footpath was visible, bordered by the same stone benches previously recorded, and the chapel appeared structurally sound. No individuals were seen, but the presence of trimmed foliage and maintained outbuildings was taken as indirect evidence of occupancy. Upon return, the registrar submitted a summary indicating visual confirmation of habitation, exemption status maintained, no additional filings advised. Around this time, a merchant in the central square received a small package marked with the Falcon Ridge insignia. Inside was a folded list of materials, each assigned a numeric value. The request was for powdered dyes, brass wire, and coquina sealant. At the bottom of the note appeared a line not related to the items. "For those who continue without record, the form persists." The merchant, unfamiliar with the phrasing, treated it as a ceremonial reference. The requested items were prepared and sent via courier to the designated drop point at the Eastern Ridge Path. In late April, a teacher from the district's traveling education circuit reported an encounter with 3 individuals on the Old Chapel Road. The individuals, described as dressed in unmarked grey garments with cloth gloves, stood beside a cart bearing wrapped parcels. They offered no greeting and made no inquiry. The teacher noted their silence but did not interpret it as threatening. Upon returning to the city, she submitted a simple note reading, "Presence observed near non-public site, orderly behavior, no action necessary." The note was appended to the education circuit's seasonal review. May brought a minor shift in routine mail patterns. Several letters addressed to recipients in outlying districts began including a symbol in the lower corner of the envelope, a ring composed of linked dots forming a loop. The letters originated from multiple towns, but bore handwriting consistent in slant and spacing. While the content varied, mostly updates on property conditions and planting schedules, the inclusion of the same emblem suggested a shared source or affiliation. The local post office filed a procedural note indicating non-standard graphic included on outgoing correspondence, undetermined relevance. Meanwhile, a volunteer from the Historical Preservation Board submitted a personal statement to the archive, referencing a discovery made while sorting unused deed maps. In a folded folio labeled 1823 Holdings, East Corridor, the volunteer found a loose slip of paper containing a short list of names and dates. All names were from early property owners near the Falcon Ridge estate, and each date corresponded with the last known filing from that owner. The list ended with the phrase, "Witnessed, prepared, not removed." The slip bore no identifying seal. The discovery was placed with inactive findings and marked as historical artifact use pending. By early June, the chapel remained physically unaltered. Its doors were closed, windows covered, and no visible light emitted from within. However, several residents in the vicinity reported subtle changes in environmental detail. A marsh tracker mentioned that the ground near the Eastern Trail had become unnaturally dry despite recent rain. Another resident noted that the hedge surrounding the estate had grown thicker, with certain sections appearing recently trimmed by unseen hands. These observations were not filed officially, but circulated through personal correspondence. The tone of the letters remained neutral, with emphasis placed on maintenance rather than disturbance. That same month, a government-appointed assessor visiting the district for unrelated matters stopped near the Falcon Ridge estate to verify signage placement along the inland route. While inspecting the marker stones, he discovered a new inscription engraved along one of the base plates. The engraving, recently etched, read, "The form remains when the name is not recalled. Each pattern answers without speech." The assessor recorded the wording and submitted it to the district archive. No additional investigation was ordered, and the stone was left untouched. By mid-year, a pattern emerged across multiple institutions. Minor references to the estate, often buried within correspondence, inventory logs, or route reports, carried common phrases, recurring symbols, or indirect acknowledgements of presence. These references did not request interaction and carried no signs of appeal. The consistency suggested that the estate's internal processes remained active, even if external engagement remained minimal. The term continued form began appearing in annotations beside estate-related entries, shorthand for operations that required no official adjustment. In the final week of June, a fisherman living near the outer marsh reported seeing faint columns of smoke rising from the eastern edge of the estate, separate from the manor or chapel. The smoke appeared in thin vertical streams, dispersed evenly across the ridge. The fisherman did not approach, but counted 6 columns before they dissipated. He mentioned the sighting in a supply ledger submitted later that month. A junior clerk underlined the notation and added the comment, "Internal combustion for ritual or purification use, probable not confirmed." No further action followed. The estate submitted no documentation during this time, and no formal complaints were registered against it. Maintenance of its exemption classification continued without delay, supported by the registrar's early spring findings. A year-end summary included the estate under the heading Stable Exemption, Non-Commercial Religious Observance, Static Designation. No revisions were proposed. In July of 1831, an archivist reviewing clerical boundary files discovered a misfiled report from 1826 marked with a faded seal matching the Falconridge estate. The document, folded into a ledger of unrelated property easements, detailed a series of soil extractions performed near the eastern ridge. The purpose listed was stability testing for ceremonial expansion. No further elaboration was provided. The document was signed with initials that did not match any known city employee, and the clerk receiving the submission had made no annotations at the time. Once rediscovered, the report was placed in a holding file pending review. It received no further evaluation. In August, a seasonal census assistant conducting interviews in outlying districts recorded a brief exchange with a resident living 1 mile from the estate. When asked to verify household counts, the resident declined to answer directly but remarked, "If you're tracking where the noise goes, you'll have to include what doesn't make any." The comment was not entered into the official count, but was preserved in the assistant's field journal. That journal, later submitted as part of a district training package, included 2 sketches depicting the chapel roofline and a row of symbols drawn into soft earth beside the path. The symbols, while clear in form, matched no known alphabet. By early September, the estate had again become a fixed point of reference in regional mapping exercises. A cartographer updating a military pass-through guide for coastal routes listed the Falconridge estate not by name, but as a recognized structure of continued form. The phrase was not explained and was printed in the margin beside a plain rectangle representing the manor grounds. No access routes were marked, though the eastern path was included in the topographic layer as ceremonial trace. The guide was distributed without edits to the term. A month later, the port clerk overseeing outbound manifests noted a recurring set of orders involving containers marked with blue wax seals. These containers, typically small and uniformly shaped, were assigned for overland transit to multiple inland towns. No contents were disclosed, and all dispatch requests included the phrase, "Upon receipt, do not open until counted." The phrasing appeared on each shipment slip and was accepted without protest by the courier. The port's inventory ledger flagged the repeated destination code as non-commercial ritual transport verified. That October, an apprentice stonemason visited the edge of the Falconridge estate while surveying potential quarries for lime extraction. While there, he recorded the presence of 3 coquina slabs laid flat within a shallow depression near the ridge. Each slab bore a groove along the edge, as though intended to hold an adjoining piece. The apprentice's sketch, submitted to his guild instructor, included no speculation, but did indicate that the placement was consistent with load-bearing installations. He filed no formal request to return and noted only that the work was already done. Toward the end of the year, a sequence of unaddressed letters was left in the post office's external drop box. Each was sealed with wax, showing a single arc intersected by a vertical line. The contents of the letters were short phrases printed in formal block script. Examples included attendance confirmed, structure intact, intervals maintained, and silence recognized. No identifying names were included. The letters were bundled and placed in the unclaimed correspondence drawer. After 3 weeks, they were transferred to the regional archive for preservation under the heading Liturgical Communiqué, unauthenticated. On December 31st, during year-end registry consolidation, a note was added by a retiring archivist summarizing the standing of several properties whose records remained static. For the Falcon Ridge estate, the entry read, "Filed as continuous observance. Revisions not issued. No request for termination received. Recommend archival stasis." The note was signed, dated, and left unchallenged. The estate's file, one of the thickest in the rural religious category, was moved to permanent status. No closures were filed. The estate did not reappear in subsequent annual inspections. Over time, its designation was retained on official documents, but gradually marked as heritage classification, non-intervention. The paths around it remained open, though foot traffic declined. The buildings continued to appear maintained, and the grounds were never recorded as overgrown. Small signs of continued presence, a swept threshold, trimmed brush, rearranged stones, were observed but never traced to specific individuals. No known residents filed legal documentation, and no deaths or departures were formally recorded. For decades following, mentions of the estate appeared sporadically in academic or regional texts, often as a reference point in discussions of undeclared religious holdings. None of the original property holders were traced beyond the 1830s. The estate's internal records, if preserved, were never submitted to any institutional body. The chapel remained structurally intact into the 20th century, though it was no longer listed in diocesan records. Its foundation remained undisturbed. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering. This story was taken from documents that were found. All names have been edited to protect the source.